SciArt project, the Science and Art project. And for those who do not know the JRC, the Joint Research Centre is the European Commission Science and Knowledge Service. My colleagues do science in support of policy, which means that they try to inject some solid science into the entire EU regulatory framework. Now, in a research institute, one does do research projects, and the SciArt project is, by consequence, in the first place, an epistemological investigation into the reasons why art and science are coming together after centuries of estrangement. The point of view of working between these interstices between the arts and the sciences makes me feel a little bit an outlier in this panel on digital arts and sustainable web, but I think that we have many eminent colleagues giving concrete examples, so I can give you some of the background and why these things are happening. So first of all, if we try to look at the reasons why art and science are coming together after all these centuries, it's clear that there are too many to treat in this short talk, but I think it's sufficient to say that the rift is an historical cultural construct that went from being useful to further specialization and thus the prestige of both parties, and then was pushed so far that it became rather a hindrance and that blocked true creativity and real innovation and research. Artists have understood this since a long time, and they've taken up the tools of science with great freedom according to their imagination. And that not only in the digital arts, but in many disciplines, and at least since the 60s. They still need the scientists, though, to confront their ideas, to know the latest developments in science, and also to refine their works. But true art science happens only when both meet as equals in what we have called a democracy of disciplines. We have seen that creative encounters between artists and scientists create a space of openness, and that space can help to bridge the difficulties that both encounter in their practices. I personally call this space a space of cognitive uncertainty, and I think there resides precisely the true force of this collaboration. Because it is in these uncertainties that lies an openness that can help SciArt to point to new directions, to invent new narratives, to work on sense-making using not all tools, but the tools of the insights of modern science with the powerful imagination of the artists. Academics have called this artistic thinking to make a difference with design thinking, and the difference is important because while design thinking finds solution, artistic thinking poses questions. And it is precisely by posing these questions that they can bring in the scientists into the space of creation. So in this way, these collaborations can help to close the gaps that we have created basically ourselves, the gaps between nature and culture, between human and non-human, between human and technology, and so many others. There is a second reason why I feel myself a little bit of an outlier, and that is that even if we worked with digital arts in the past, we are now working on a new theme that should support the EU Green Deal and the fight against climate change. It is called Nature-Archy towards a natural contract, and our exploration started from the French philosopher Michel Serres. In his 1990 booklet, The Natural Contract, Serres contends that the old social contract that bound human collectivities in the past has now been replaced by a natural contract, by the simple fact that we have become, quote, equipotent, unquote, with nature. Having the capacity to destroy, we have now a relationship with nature that is typical of a marriage contract with ties, bonds, and responsibilities. As such, the subject allows us to tackle the issues from a deep cultural point of view, and we can look at deep ecology, at decolonizing nature, at the relationship between human, non-human, at the rights of nature as they are unfolding now in the last years, at sustainable technology, always targeting the deep cultural assumptions that still govern us. In other words, by invoking the need for a more in-depth treatment of our attitudes towards nature, we think, or we hope, that we can touch this skein of contradictory attitudes that is typical for our incapacity to arrive at real collective action. Putting together nature and law, culture and nature, science and art, meaning, heart and emotion, we attempt to get to the root of the problem. And between brackets, root in Latin is radix and lies at the root of the word radical. In conclusion, if I feel a little bit of an outlier, it is because we think that the problems of innovation and sustainable technology must be tackled at a level that is capable of embracing the deep cultural entanglement of our incapacity for change. It's clear that part of the answer lies in humans' proven capacity to confront complex issues with artful directness and emotional power, harnessing knowledge as well as imagination in order to convince those that are still not with us as to the reasons to act. It starts from these spaces of art, this act of rewilding our imagination, no, which I would call the incubator, but the questioning incubator of innovation. In the end, we think it is not so much about technology, it is not so much about industrial innovation, but it is about tackling this tangled knot where we have also resilience, the capacity of our societies to empower democracy, our capacity to tackling injustice, social injustice and inequality, not only within our societies, but also between the North and the South. It is about decolonization, not only of the West, but also of nature, because in the end, we must address our most intimate attitudes to unlock at the root of the problems, to unlock the capacity to change. So in the end, I think that real innovation will come when we have learned to become true radicals. That is, we sit at the roots of our attitudes and we can learn again to live humbly under the sovereignty of nature. Thank you.
Hello everybody, thank you for joining us, to our audience here in the Innovation Pavilion and to those online. This year's COP edition includes the introduction of culture and creative sector industries to the UGIH. Today's panel symbolizes the start of an ongoing, inclusive conversation between civil society, government at all levels, indigenous people organizations, cultural organizations and institutions, businesses, universities and research organizations. The agents of change on this panel include Chris Adams, Miroslav Polzer, and we've got a late edition with Zarina, and joining us remotely will be Katherine Foster, who's the Executive Director, Green Digital Finance Alliance. Before we begin, guys, can we give me a little introduction about who you are and what it is that you do? Starting with you first, Miroslav.
Thank you very much, Muchaneta. So, I'm Miroslav Polzer. I'm with the International Association for the Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges. It's a civil society organization, an entrepreneurial civil society organization. We understand ourselves some kind as governance entrepreneurs working on how to innovate the multi-stakeholder provision of global public goods. And as regards climate, the challenge is we need all of society engaged. And we need a systemic solution which will enable everyone, everywhere to take meaningful and rewarding action. And we are convinced that there are three pillars: culture, technology, and organizational innovation needed to get there. And congratulations to Climate Kick for hosting today's event on digital art, in art in general, for enhancing all of society engagement. We are convinced this is the way to go. We have our Digital Art for Climate initiative. We have our Digital Innovation and Digital Art for Climate pavilion just across the aisle here, and happy to collaborate with you to build a movement of creative community, youth, and everybody else inspired by art to take bold and effective climate action.
And you, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, folks. Hello. Can you hear me all right? Yes, cool. My name is Chris Adams. I am the Executive Director of the Green Web Foundation. For the last 15 years, we've been tracking the transition of the internet away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. And we are working towards an entirely fossil-free internet by 2030. We think we can do this by getting everyone to divest from fossil fuels and reinvest in digital equity. I also work with the Green Software Foundation, which is a larger organization comprised of companies you may have heard of, like Microsoft or ThoughtWorks and so on, where we basically define standards to embed the values associated with 1.5 into the tooling and into the software that we build. And I think that's me for now. I'll hand over to the next person.
Thank you. My name is Zarina Kargar. Originally, I'm an architect who transitioned into Web3 and technology. I currently work as head of ecosystem growth and business development at an NFT chain. It's a parachain on Polkadot, one of the most sustainable for NFTs, and we're a proud partner of Digital Art for Climate initiative. We've been working with Dr. Miroslav Polzer on this initiative for over a year and a half already, and as you already mentioned, we have a pavilion this year and an exhibition of our artists. I'm also EU Climate Pact Ambassador, and I'm based in Valencia in Spain, which is the green capital of Europe in 2024. Very excited and honored to be on this panel today to discuss and engage more with the creative community. As we have seen in our experience, it is super important to have creative people building a bridge between organizations, businesses, initiatives, and building this visual representation of the challenges we're facing for people to really relate, understand, and educate themselves on climate challenges.
Thank you, Irina. Your statement leads us straight into our first question. It's been said that the culture and creative sector industries have a kind of like a significant role to play as we seek to transform the industry as best as we can. What are your thoughts on this? What role does culture and creative sector have to play when it comes to climate change? Would you like to start first, Miroslav?
Yeah. Thank you very much. So the climate topic in general. No, we have, as those who want to have implementation of global goals, we have the challenge that we need all of society, but that we have difficult to connect with the people on the street, so that they would make the right consumption decisions, even the right election decision, that they really support those political leaders who want bold climate action. And so it's this connection problem, it's a communication problem, and we are trying it with science, with IPCC reports, with numbers, but this does not really resonate with the people. It's not their language, and many people don't understand the connections between what they are doing and the global climate crisis. And with art, and we have started to work on youth engagement in sustainable development efforts with the Global Youth Music Contest for the Rio +20 conference 2012 on sustainable development. We've asked young people to produce music video clips in which they have expressed their vision of a sustainable world. And we've seen this is such a powerful tool. Young people, on the one hand, if they hear music, music is one of the most important elements in the life of young people. We hear it when we ask people, what are your 3 most important things in life? 70% mention among the 3 most important things in life, music. It's very interesting. And they are really touched, moved, the hearts open up. and then they are open to listen more, and they feel a relationship to the topic, and they are they feel to be part of a community, and they are ready to invest their actions into these efforts for common good. So on the one hand, it's the language youth and the general public understand, they can relate to, and then the other thing is that we can include it also in the educational systems. That's one thing. And one third topic that's here to discuss is digital art, how we now with this Web3 solutions, with NFTs, creation of digital assets, we can create creative economy models in which really an army of creatives can be engaged in a rewarding manner so that it's income generating for those who contribute. 10 years ago, we've asked young people to produce music video clips. We've had some winners who had the reward to come to Rio, but nobody could live out of it. But now with NFT technologies, and so people can have a living out of it, and we are building the ecosystem with IRENA and Youth Network and all our partners, UN Habitat, Youth Program and others. So perhaps too broad and too diffuse, but that's my first statement on this.
I mean, I think you make a really good point with regards to they don't speak the language. A lot of communication problems when it comes to sustainability in general is that we're all speaking various languages, but no one's really taking that moment to listen and to understand, which is why I think collaborations are really important, because we all try to kind of come together. What do you think, Chris? What's your take on it? How can we use this platform to make a change?
I think the culture and the creative sectors, they have a real role in presenting plausible and desirable visions of the future that we can be heading towards and we can basically be inspired by. Previous panels, we were talking about the Bauhaus as an example of how basically you might embed values into certain kind of cultural artifacts. And you can see very much the influence of things like, say, Bauhaus in how we buy furniture, or even companies like IKEA's wares and stuff like that. So I think that in many ways, design actually can cast a very, very long shadow. Now, I think you can also see things just in how many of us are holding smartphones here, right? You can totally, if you speak to the engineers who design like iPhones and iPads, they will talk to you all about how they were totally influenced by Star Trek and stuff like that. So in many ways, you're providing in some way the visions that people would actually then try and build. And I think that's actually a really, really useful thing for us to do. My organization, we run a magazine called Branch Magazine, where we basically talk about the intersection of climate and technology. So we hear from people who work at, say, Amazon, but we also hear from people in the Amazon. So we give the voices for people like that as well. Because I think you need a really wide selection of voices to end up with a kind of more inclusive and attractive version of the future. I think that's actually quite useful, because when you create these ideas, when you create visions of this, it becomes easier for people to then build this themselves. So we're working with a larger organization with larger technology companies. They can end up embedding these ideas into the tools they use, so that you end up with basically digital tools which are a little bit more, well, ideally a lot more sustainable, and actually can basically keep these values that we really hold dear about, say, 1.5 degrees and avoiding essentially a climate crisis, and using that as things we design for. And I think that's me for now. I'll hand over to the next person.
Thank you. So from the technology point of view, what we can do, we can create inclusivity. Because we're here today in person, having an advantage and an opportunity to listen to different talks, to join conversations, to understand what the problems are. But what about people outside of here? I really strongly believe that we need to expand the COP, utilizing internet, utilizing Web3, so creating social campaigns like Digital Art for Climate. We have been also inviting people to speak virtually. We were building bridges with social media accounts, with online communities. We were introducing Ejbar Foundation initiatives on carbon markets, on distributing finance, on decentralized finance, how these new financial instruments can help to channel financial resources to the climate initiatives locally, for example, because we're here talking about the world, but we also need to make sure that local initiatives are taken into account, because certain areas are more affected by climate change than others. And just this morning there was a wonderful panel discussion at the UAE pavilion with the mayors of cities, and their problem is education. Their problem is that the majority of population are young people, people who are not educated about sustainability and climate change, and they are calling climate activists, youth, to come there to spread the message, to create workshops, to create webinars, to educate the population that climate change is affecting them, what can be the outcomes. So education is one of the really key elements that needs to be built together as a community of climate experts, of technology experts. And second important initiative, and also in the framework of Digital Art for Climate, with our first art competition for COP26, we were able to bring the voices of young artists who were themselves affected by the climate change events, such as hurricane. Our winner of COP26 art competition, Brix Martilo Dumas, he lives in the Philippines. So his family experienced really the hurricane and the climate change on a personal level. And his story is very, very touching, and it really inspired all of us to talk about it more, to educate ourselves, to educate our communities, to really expand the boundaries and bring more of these personal stories that everybody can relate to, because we don't have that much time left. This year in Spain, we were locked in for 2 months, 45 days of extreme heat weather when you couldn't step outside of the house. I feel like my summer was stolen this year. It's very sad. So we definitely need to adjust society, use the tools that we have today. And this is mainly the conversations that we're having at the Digital Innovation Pavilion, that we have certain tools, they are developed, they are functioning, and we need to utilize them. We need to educate about those tools and bring on board more young people, well, simply also because they're very prone to perceptive to change. They can use this technology quickly. They get things quickly. So they are the future. They're the ones to now, help us to build these new solutions, to build communities, and be engaged in the process. Also another very important initiative I wanted to mention today is our Digital Art for Climate Marketplace. We are helping artists, creatives to fundraise using NFT technology. And we have launched last week at the press conference a new marketplace. First of all, it is based on the most sustainable NFT chain unique network. The energy consumption is really minimal. The CO2 impact equals, a human being exhales 30 times more than the pollution we produce. So this is fundamental to use by default sustainable technologies. And second advantage is that using NFTs can be challenging because people need to understand how to deal with cryptocurrencies. So we have eliminated that barrier. We have introduced credit card payments, so people can buy NFT with their credit cards and support our partner initiative, UN Habitat in Kenya, and support our artists because obviously the proceeds are distributed, as well as to support the continuation of this initiative and the creation of larger organizations such as United Citizens Organization, and also help this initiative and this community to prepare for COP28, where we have more ambitious plans and larger presence and building partnerships for already next year, starting from today and this 2 weeks.
Thank you, Irina. I think the attitude that we need to take is we leave no one behind. We don't only focus on one part of the world. We take like a global look of like, how can we do this? And we don't leave anyone behind. And we've got Katherine joining us. Hello, Katherine.
I wish I could be there in person still.
Thank you so much for joining us remotely. Could you introduce yourself to our audience online and also here in person?
Sure. My name is Katherine Foster. I'm the Executive Director of the Green Digital Finance Alliance, which is a Swiss-based not-for-profit that co-creates transformative digital and financial innovation for climate, nature, and biodiversity challenges with a global network. But my background is actually in diplomacy, and moreover, leveraging a lot of cultural diplomacy for a number of initiatives over 30 years. And I've also worked with the EU's Climate Kick and with Digital Art for Climate and Miroslav. So this is a really exciting panel. I'm very happy to participate.
Thank you. We have a question directly for you. I thought I'll just throw you in at the deep end. So despite the arrival of groundbreaking emerging technologies, progress and integration has often been impeded by infrastructure gaps, data gaps, credibility issues, efficiency challenges, and misaligned incentives. How do you envision creative industries moving forward?
It's actually taken right out of some of my talks about the three challenges, I think, with digital innovation, which is are ensuring that we're not perpetuating additional gaps, that we're not actually excluding generations, genders, and geographies, really. So this is a really key balanced exercise that we have to undertake. And I think it begins with understanding that there are divides, there are infrastructure gaps, that there's also knowledge gaps and information gaps that have to be addressed. And I think it also is about ensuring that the focus on digital technology doesn't narrow our lens on impact. And I go back to some of the comments that were made previously about giving youth voice. Well, I actually see youth and local individuals as experts, not just giving them a voice, but including them in building out, in co-creating the infrastructure, in generating the tools, the frameworks, the practical approaches with a focus on systems innovation. And how that's done practically, I think we've seen a few areas and methods in which that is actually happening. But I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Katherine. Chris, I want to ask you a question because I think it's quite interesting what it is that you do. So I've read that if the internet was a country, it would be the 7th largest polluter in the world and is expected to grow considerably by 2030. So as an agent of change, can you explain concrete steps on how everyone can reduce their digital footprint and embrace a web that is good for and planet?
So yes, there is an environmental footprint to the internet and the tech sector. I mean, the energy has to come from somewhere, and right now a significant chunk of the power we rely on comes from fossil fuels. So one thing we can do is basically get off fossil fuels. That's not the entire problem, because you have to basically, to turn sand into chips is also very energy intensive. There's stuff we need to do there. But one of the real things that we really should be doing is getting off fossil fuels. And you can do that by basically choosing choosing the kind of power that you actually might want to have. But in many cases, it's actually worth engaging at a political level as well, because that's going to be the thing that's going to make more of a difference in many ways. There are people who will say things like, you should stop using Netflix or worry or don't do so many Zoom calls or things like that. I actually feel that given that we've had a pandemic in the last 2 or 3 years, I found these really, really useful. And I think I don't think people should feel really, really terrible about using digital services for this stuff, but we should be more mindful of how they're made and what the companies who make them are doing to actually stay on target for 1.5. That's one of the bigger things I would actually say that we should do.
Do you think it's possible for them to change how they create, so we can use it, but it's a better platform? Do you think that's a possibility, or is that just something that, it's a dream, we never get there?
I think placing the burden on end users to basically decarbonize the entire internet feels like it's putting the burden in the wrong place. When you think about how rich large tech companies are, I mean, they are literally trillion-dollar companies. This year, Amazon was able to lose $1 trillion in market value, and it's still one of the largest companies on earth, right? Like, these folks have much, much broader shoulders, and they could be doing a lot more, and they could be spending a lot more money on this. Like, if you think about, like, say, one company, for example, Amazon is doing a fair amount, But they could be doing a lot more, given the fact that they made $60 billion in revenue, and we've got in the last year, and like that gets a lot of solar panels, and there's a lot that you could do from there. For example, I think it's really it's on like designers and people building to actually kind of press their suppliers and say we should be doing more for this. But really asking end users to do this, I think it's better for people who are like citizens and end users to actually engage at a political level and say we should be calling for better regulation. So we set these things as a default, so that we set the expectation that of course all digital technology runs on renewable power. That seems like a no-brainer in my view.
It sounds to me like we're very much easily distracted by what they're doing good, but therefore we're not looking at what the bad side of it is.
Yeah, there's a really good example of this. Like, we really should, in my view, hold large companies accountable for things like this. Because we can talk about, isn't it great that people are using renewable energy and things like that, but we know that technology is a really, really powerful tool. We know it's an accelerant in many ways. So it makes things more likely to happen. And that's why people spend lots of money on digital services for this. If you were going to use technology to, say, help drill for oil and gas, right, then that's not going to be something which is very useful, is helpful for us. And in many cases, I think that you kind of need to like set an expectation that these are things that as creatives or as technologists we don't want to be doing. I mean, one example might be, okay, this conference here. The organization that does the comms and the PR for this, they're also the people who do loads of the kind of PR firms, the fossil fuel firms. And you feel like, if we have a conference all about climate change, maybe we should be being a bit more specific about who we're going to have on board here. And there are groups like Clean Creatives who have basically said, we actually are pushing for 1.5. We're not going to do work with fossil fuels. We're not going to we want to do everything we can to speed a transition away from this to something which is more inclusive, more advanced, and better. There are groups that do this. You could choose from all the people there rather than organizations like this. And I feel that would be much more consistent with the values that we have here in the Blue Zone, which is all about civil society.
If I might add.
I was going to say, I see you nodding your head a lot, Katherine. Do you have anything to add?
I do, actually, because last year, in between working with Open Earth Foundation, where we did, the biggest NFT drop to raise funds with people, I actually worked with the UN, the Swiss government, on a series of papers that looked at the impact of these digital platforms on the SDGs. And it wasn't just on climate. But what became clear in the 3 papers that I did was that there are those very overt impacts that were saying, yes, ICT has as big a footprint as the airline industry worldwide, but as was said, we can't put the burden on the users, but instead we can flip that and say these platforms like Amazon's and others have invisible impacts because of their business models. They're very complex business models where everything is embedded. So for example, if you look at Amazon, you're trying to find a white bio t-shirt. Good luck, because the algorithms will not give you that choice. They will let you see what they want you to see. And so that lack of consumer information, that lack of information sets a cycle in motion where not only do you receive a product that may not have those attributes you want, you're not sure about what you're going to get, and then it puts into this entire cycle about receiving this good and then having it returned either to a landfill or to even worse fates, fire, etc., to trash incinerators, and perpetuating this because the business model does not enable that transparent information. And I think that is a role that digital platforms can play, and that's one thing that the Green Digital Finance Alliance, with its Every Action Counts coalition, is doing, is it's recognizing that action is very contextualized. So we don't have a one-size-fits-all, but these platforms around the world came together, 14 of them, everyone from MasterCard to Rabobank to others, to say, this is how we're working with individuals to provide better information, to allow them to make better choices. So it's not dismissing the relationships that we have with our consumer lifestyle, but it's trying to bit by bit improve that and ensure we don't have these invisible impacts on top of it all.
Thank you, Katherine. Hello, Adriaan. How are you?
I'm fine. Hello. Hello, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us. Miroslav, I did a bit of reading on you, and I came across an interview where you stated that the world needs systematic solutions and that we need to create an institutional framework along with economic and societal frameworks. Can you explain further what you meant by this statement?
Okay, that's a pleasure to answer this question. Yeah, fine, thanks. So let's look at this question regarding the energy consumption and the environmental footprint of these enterprises in the digital industry. It's a shame. As you said, there are solutions, there are resources, but it's not, the pressure is not there, there's not the framework that the right decisions would be made. There's one element is carbon pricing. It's so simple that the user pays, the ones who is causing the problem, the externalities, the damage to the environment should pay for it. It's so logic, it's so essential, so basic, but the world is not functioning to implement it, because at the end it needs to be the national governments who take these decisions. And we have a systems failure there, we have a governance failure, because the governments think, oh, if the others will not do, then we have competitive disadvantages, or if we impose now some burden, the fuel price will grow, our people will punish us at the next election. So the systems as they are now, they are not delivering the right amount of global public goods. Enough climate action, enough the correct price signals and everything. And so the system for the provision of global public goods is failing. And really the whole UN system, I love the UN, it's the only global structure that has the mandate, but it's not delivering because it does not have the non-state actors. All of us, we are not part of the DNA of the UN system. It's only national governments coordinating, and the national governments with their self-interest, they are failing us. And we really have now to develop better mechanisms and digital innovation. I think first coming back to the art piece, we have to be bold enough, courageous enough to envisage in alternative futures. We have to be open to, and artists are wonderful in showing us new possibilities that we didn't think of, or that we wouldn't come to if we make incremental steps. Let's be open to totally new imaginations of the public space, public sector innovation, and digital innovation can help us a lot by providing digital identities. So everyone on the planet should have one. We should also connect everyone. It's a key infrastructure question. If we want to be a global community, then we have to provide access to everybody to these tools. So we need a global challenges action identity, something that we're working on, a global challenges action register for everyone, and then identifying the public good value of the actions of everyone, and then rewarding it with reimagining these carbon pricing systems, other taxation mechanisms. So a better world is possible, and we are unstoppable.
You want to play hardball, it seems like to me. Which leads me, when you mentioned the word community, it leads me to my next question, which is to all of you. How can the digital community, and all of us, combat carbon footprint and other environmental pacts as a whole? So rather than putting it on one sector, how can we all work together? Anyone happy to tackle that question?
Well, for example, Web3 is all about community. And this is a fundamental difference of this new technology of Web3 as opposed to Web2. Web2 is all about centralizations, central platform, tech giants, owning our data, controlling what we do on the internet. Web3 is about people creating initiatives, creating economic value, and being able to transact that value on the internet. We have the power to create our own activities with NFTs, with token economy. There are many already tools available, and people really get excited about it. And the most exciting part about NFTs and Web3 is the creative part of it, because it all kind of began building momentum and bridge into the real world via the arts. So people, thanks to his artwork, the world got to know that NFT exists in December 2020. So this is very novel, very fast-growing community. And now we're working on different initiatives. It is important really to connect for institutions also to invite on board art community. Like now we're going to organize a round table and an exhibition at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, 25-26 of November. We're bringing to the table established artists like Rafika Nadol. We're bringing young artists in the conversation. We're creating this mentorship, this knowledge, like how do you build a career as an artist, how do you access Web3 tools, what tools are available for you as an artist, what tools are available for you to build this community. There are many different digital platforms, and also an important thing I think we need to all demand as a society is for tech companies, industries, enterprise to use green technology. It is, stop buying your way out of hell because you're polluting. Just let's identify what are the green infrastructures, what is that green technology that is working well, that is helping us, and start using it more, start promoting it more as a society, because it does exist. We just need to transform our perception, use our imagination and creativity to come up with the new solutions for climate action.
Why do you think they're not using green technology? If it already exists, it's available, where do you think the resistance is coming from? Chris, maybe you can also tackle this one.
Yeah, where I work at the Green Web Foundation, we think in terms of consumption, intensity and direction as things that you can do to actually use as levers for digital to actually achieve some kind of climate goals. You can think of, if we think about consumption, there's whole things about using less, but there's also, and there, like if you're basically building any kind of tools yourself or things like that, then obviously there's a whole thing about efficiency and not being so wasteful. But there's also a kind of, you can also think about in consumption, a kind of consumer side. Like if you think about the role that like advertising is actually playing, so in the UK there's a group called Purpose Disruptors. They basically, this is an advertising group full of employees in the advertising industry. They've said, we've looked at the carbon footprint, the kind of uplift that we create. And we think that we're basically we're inducing consumption to the tune of around 30% on top of what it otherwise would be. Now that's like us. That's one thing that we should be aware of and be more thoughtful about. When we talk about intensity, you think about like the harm that's actually being done by technology, and in many ways, the most obvious one that we might think about here is basically how we power this stuff. In terms of, are we running it on coal and fossil fuels? Are we requiring it not to be run like that? Are we choosing something which is greener and more greener? But there are also other issues related to that as well. It may be the case that we might, if we only talk about carbon, then we start forgetting about things like water. And if we actually think about, okay, how are we actually going to fund people using greener energy, then we might want to think about how we currently structure it. Because right now, if you wanted to say, if you want to build any kind of digital tools and you're an industry player, basically it's the larger the company is, the easier it is for you to get access to the money that you would need to borrow to actually get like a wind farm or anything put together. So that basically means that we end up subsidizing the largest companies to actually do this. So I think that there's something we should do there as well. Finally, on direction, I think there's something to be said about, well, what world do we want to be pushing people towards or driving things towards? So I spoke about the idea of using technology for, say, enhancing or basically inducing things like more consumption or more exploration for oil and gas and things like that. But I think there's positive uses for this. You could look at organizations like My Society. They make it really, really easy to engage at a local level with your local government and find out, do they have a plan on climate? Is their plan better or worse than their neighbours? So you can actually make sense of the fact that there are people working really, really hard on this, and necessarily don't have the answers, but there's a way for you to actually engage and speak as well. So I think these are the things it's worth thinking about in terms of being able to use digital to actually achieve some kind of climate ends. It's consumption, intensity, and direction.
Thank you, Chris. Adriaan, I have a question for you. I don't know if Adriaan is still there. He is. Hello, Adriaan. Can you hear us?
I'm still there.
You can hear
I'm
us.
Still there.
Perfect. Hello, Adriaan. You once
Hi.
said that if we want to explore our humanity to the fullest, we must remember that there can be no good art without science and no good science without art. Can you elaborate on what you meant?
Well, I think that what we are seeing now is a kind of resurging of the collaboration between art and science that at one hand is inspired what happened in the 60s and on the other hand misses out on certain of the aspects of the 60s and also corrects certain of these aspects. Yeah? In the 60s you had a kind of still a kind of atmosphere still very much determined by World War II optimism or post-World War II optimism, where the science would improve the world and gave gadgets to the people and improved their daily lives with dishwashers, washers, etc. And where scientists were experts that then were hampered by the artists. The artists wanted to work with them, and it came from the artists. No? But this faded a little bit also due to the fact that of the changing, because science became too complex. And so the experts that were in the driving seat in the 50s and the early 60s then became seen with a little bit of mistrust. Many of the art-science collaborations were not really successful. They got lots of criticism. They got involved into this, the critique of the United States at the end of the 60s, and so it petered out a little bit. And in the 80s, you see the return to traditional painting with people like Richter and Basquiat, etc., etc. What is happening now is that I think, at one hand, the need for interdisciplinarity is becoming more crucial. The push is much stronger, and we also see that artists help the scientists to find a new space of creativity which they have lost in the meantime. But it is like Miroslav said earlier, there is a space where art and science can meet, where artists can open up for the scientists a kind of safe haven of creativity. And that can help us to go further and to have these jumps, these imaginations of a new future. I will only mention one person, but I saw a beautiful concept by British artist James Bridle, which is called Server Farm, and where he proposes to make a computer on a farm with only organic elements. No? And I think this is the kind of thing that is happening now, that if you combine both, by the way, I asked my scientific coordinator if he thought this was feasible, and he said, yes, of course, but it will work a little bit differently than the computers we have now. But it's clear that this kind of push that artists can sometimes give to go beyond what is feasible, beyond what complex of industry and science and the arts themselves allow for, that is what we are working on at the JRC SciArt project. And by the way, I must add that I'm talking at personal behalf and not on behalf of the JRC or the European Commission.
Thank you so much for breaking that down. Before I ask the panel one final question, I want to turn it to the audience. Has anyone got a question for our panelists? No one? Okay, so this is the final question, guys. In one sentence, what are you willing to commit to here? And what comes next for your organization on the journey to be more sustainable for the planet and the industry? Miroslav, let's start with you.
So, what we commit to is to build the ecosystem for youth and citizens climate action empowerment with data and digital innovation in an open and participatory manner. We are building a consortium with the Climate Change Coalition in this field, and we will do the necessary resource mobilization together and count also on Climate Kick to be with its army of climate entrepreneurs part of our movement. And we committed that we will use in developing these tools the most environmentally sound technologies and platforms, and that we will push the members also of the Climate Change Coalition to be aware of the environmental footprint of the solutions that we provide and to strive to lower the impact day after day.
Sounds like a plan. Chris, what are you willing to commit to here, and what comes next for you?
Okay, well, we had a role in the creation of the Sustainable Web Manifesto, which we've signed, which basically commits everyone already to build digital tools that are clean, efficient, open, honest, regenerative, and resilient. But the thing I can commit to now is I can say that my organization, we're going to commit at least 1.5% of revenue to stay for 1.5 degrees of warming, and publish all of that and publish what we're doing on climate action. And we would like to invite any other organization who would also like to commit 1.5% of their annual revenue to keep 1.5 degrees alive. I'd be up for seeing if anyone would be up for doing that as well, because that feels like it would raise quite a lot of cash from larger organizations very, very quickly.
I like that. I like that a lot.
1.5 for 1.5.
Irina, the same question to you. What are you willing to commit to today, and what comes next for your organization?
I commit to continue developing accessible tools using green technology, bringing together art, technology, and climate action community, advocating for the use of green technology and inclusivity among young community and creative community. And our next plan is to build sustainable metaverse strategy to ensure that the solutions we provide as a community in terms of virtual reality, AI, blockchain are sustainable and green, and they give value to people who want to enter the metaverse, use Web3, and build new solutions for COP28 and beyond.
Love it. Thank you. Katherine, same to you. What are you willing to commit to here, and what comes next for your organization?
I commit to continue the 30 years of leadership and actually breaking down boundaries that I have done since I started in this process as someone who brought youth to UNGA as experts, not just as voices, who leveraged arts and culture in human security and climate change when policy doors were closed, who left diplomacy when Canada left Kyoto. I commit to leading out and bridging the silos in the fragmented solution space, to shifting that systems change that Miroslav and I talk about and have been working on. I commit to the Climate Finance Lab, the city's implementation, and all of the things that I have launched in the 3 months I've been in this leadership role to digital and financial pathways for climate.
And last but not least, Adriaan, what are you willing to commit to, and what comes next for you?
Well, last but not least, Adriaan, but Adriaan cannot commit for the European Commission nor for the JRC, and I trust you understand that. Of course, let me remind you that the European Commission anyway is still on the forefront of lots of initiatives that go from the Green Deal to the new European Bauhaus. No? And let's not forget that Ursula von der Leyen, in her speech on the new European Bauhaus, invoked also the radical spirit of the new European Bauhaus, that was not only art and science or technology, but it was also social, and it was a movement that wanted to create social progress through the arts and technology. And the NEB is a beautiful project, much bigger than the JRC SIAD project, where we try to push these novelties. As project leader of the SIAD project, I can commit to trying to bring all these things more into the mainstream of JRC scientific research, make sure that people are aware of what's happening. We have beautiful realities by incredible artists that we have met, and these things must be propagated also in the way that they can enrich and cross-fertilize scientific research. And that's a commitment that I have since some years now.
Do you know what I like the most about you guys? None of you broke sweat when I asked that commitment question. Normally when you ask someone to commit, they start to sweat, they start to stutter, but you guys can have a clear vision, which is fantastic. Thank you so much, Miroslav. Thank you so much, Chris, Irina, and you guys, thank you for joining us remotely, Adriaan and Katherine. And thank you to the audience and those online for joining us. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Wonderful, and with that we have the morning concluded for Declaration of Climate.